Before he died, Rasputin reportedly ate cakes laced with cyanide, but according to the autopsy report, there was no poison found in his system. Shockingly, it was Rasputin's daughter, Maria, who held the key to this unsettling mystery. Rasputin rose from an illiterate Russian peasant to one of the most powerful men in the Romanov Empire, and he did it by means that still stump historians today. Grigory Rasputin was born in the small town of Pokrovsky in the Russian Empire in the middle of the bitter winter of 1869. His parents had 7 other children, but besides a possible younger sister, only Rasputin managed to live to adulthood. Historians call his early life a black hole for how little we know about it, but we do know he grew up illiterate and without formal education. In 1886, when he was just 17 years old, he travelled to the faraway village of Abalak, closer to Moscow, and met the peasant Praskovia Dubrovina. The pair married in February 1887, just after his 18th birthday. Within a few years, they had 3 children together, and it looked like Rasputin was going to settle into anonymity. Then he hit the crossroads that would define his life, and that of the Russian Empire. An obsessive idea overtook him. Although only mildly religious before, he became intensely spiritual and left his wife and children at the age of 28 to go on a religious pilgrimage. At the time, one of his children was an infant, and another was still in its mother's womb. Although no one is sure why, the theories all allude to a fundamental snap in Rasputin's life. Some say he was attempting to flee from justice after stealing a horse, while others posit that he saw a vision of the Virgin Mary. Either way, as one historian put it, his momentous decision could have only been occasioned by some sort of emotional or spiritual crisis. He went to St. Nicholas Monastery, where he studied with an elder and may have learned to read and write. When he arrived back home, he was barely recognisable. He now refused alcohol, wouldn't eat meat, and prayed and sang religious songs with a strange fervour that was nonetheless mesmerising, especially to women. The effect on the people around him was immediate. Rasputin became a holy wanderer, spending months away from home even after the birth of his 3rd child in 1900. Then a strange thing began to happen. As he prayed and sang and travelled, he began to accrue followers, among them his own wife and other locals. Soon he was holding secret prayer meetings in his father's cellar. His post-pilgrimage charisma attracted and repelled people in equal measure, and the village priest looked upon his meetings with disdain and even fear. Even this early on, there were rumours that women were ritually cleansing Rasputin before each meeting. Soon, outsiders were connecting his clan to the Klisti, a sect that reportedly revelled in self-flagellation and group intimacy. In the early 1900s, people around Siberia began to hear about Rasputin's mystical qualities, and in 1904 he travelled to the city of Kazan and began to advise people on their spiritual crises. Even there, whispers that he was sleeping with his female acolytes circulated again. Despite this, high-ranking holy men were impressed with his supposed abilities and sent him on to St. Petersburg. At the time, St. Petersburg was the seat of the imperial Romanov family and was one of the largest cities Rasputin would ever visit. Much of the aristocracy was intensely interested in the occult, and they flocked around this Siberian peasant and his strange manners as soon as he found his way into their salons. By 1905, Rasputin had found his perfect followers. The Black Princesses, Militsa and Anastasia of Montenegro, were supernatural obsessed aristocrats married to the cousins of Tsar Nicholas II, and they loved Rasputin. The Romanovs were a suspicious and elusive family who kept themselves well away from the common people, but now Rasputin had an in. From Tsar Nicholas's own diary, we know that Rasputin met with the Tsar and his wife Alexandra on November 1st, 1905, at the Peterhof Palace. The entry was brief, saying only that they had made the acquaintance of a man of God, Gregory, from Tobolsk province. But the next July they met with Rasputin again, and then again that October. That October meeting was particularly noteworthy for one reason. When Rasputin walked in to meet the Tsar and Tsarina, he witnessed an extremely rare sight. Nicholas and Alexandra had also brought their children along, their older daughters Olga and Tatiana, their younger daughters Maria and Anastasia, and their 2-year-old son Alexei. The royal children almost never met figures outside of palace life, and it was an immense show of trust by the Tsar and Tsarina. But then again, they had ulterior motives. Their son Alexei was afflicted with haemophilia, a bleeding disorder he had inherited from his maternal great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. The illness was almost always fatal to males, as any slight injury could turn disastrous, and the Russian imperial family was terrified that the public would find out their only son and heir was a ticking time bomb. We don't know exactly when Rasputin began acting as Alexei's healer, but in the spring of 1907 he was called to the boy's bedside after he suffered an internal hemorrhage. Then the miracle happened. The morning after sitting in prayer with Rasputin, Alexei recovered. In the Tsarina, Rasputin had an immensely willing audience. German-born, despised by many in Russia, and exhausted from decades of trying to give birth to a son who was now already on the brink of death because of her genes, Alexandra desperately needed the comfort and fantasy that Rasputin provided. Before long, he'd become an indispensable member of the royal entourage, and Alexandra had a passionate attachment to him. After this 1907 incident, Rasputin took one step closer to the inner confidences of Alexandra and her family. Alexandra began teaching her children to think of Rasputin as their friend, and encouraged them to tell him all their worries. Likewise, Rasputin now spent long hours playing with the sheltered royals in their chambers. His intimacy with the Romanovs immediately alarmed people. In 1910, a governess to the princesses was aghast to find Rasputin in the nursery when the girls were only in their nightgowns, and tried to have him barred from the room, in addition to warning everyone about her concerns. Eventually, Alexandra had her fired. Another of the royal governesses, one who had been initially enthralled with Rasputin, went to the royal family and told them he had violated her. After dismissing her story and claiming that everything Rasputin does is holy, Alexandra had her fired as well. A slew of similar allegations followed, including from aristocrats and powerful figures in Russian society, but Alexandra waved them away. In late 1911, Rasputin made a scandalous confession. He told a monk named Iliador that he'd kissed the Tsarina, a ruinous claim to make in Imperial Russia. Iliador refused to believe it, until Rasputin produced scores of letters from Alexandra. In the coming years, it was these letters that would form the basis of the belief that Alexandra and Rasputin were having an affair. So far, Alexandra and Nicholas had shrugged off allegations about Rasputin, but the next charge was a step too far. This time it came out that Rasputin had violated a nun, and although Alexandra still believed he was innocent, it was no longer politically viable to have him around. Over the next months, Rasputin became persona non grata in St. Petersburg. In October of 1912, the Romanovs had been free of Rasputin for a year. Then, while they were on a hunting trip, disaster struck. Alexei was injured during a carriage ride and was bleeding internally. Terrified for her son, Alexandra saw only one solution. In the utmost secrecy, as Alexei's illness still wasn't public knowledge, Alexandra telegraphed Rasputin, told him of the crisis, and begged him to pray for her boy. Rasputin replied, "God has seen your tears and heard your prayers. Do not grieve. The little one will not die. do not allow the doctors to bother him too much. To everyone's astonishment, Alexei's bleeding, which had been profuse and constant for days, stopped. Even Alexei's own doctor conceded that it was hard not to view Rasputin as a mystic, saying, Rasputin would come in, walk up to the patient, look at him, and spit. The bleeding would stop in no time. How could the Empress not trust Rasputin after that? But the truth may be simpler. Aspirin was commonly used to relieve pain, but unbeknownst to people at the time, it also prevents blood from clotting. By not allowing Alexei's doctors to administer it, Rasputin may have inadvertently saved the boy's life. Though Rasputin's enemies still tried to topple him from his royal perch, he now seemed invulnerable and indulged his vices with renewed vigour. Indeed, he'd begun preaching that any woman who was intimate with him would be purified by his presence, and thus his scores of affairs were now sanctioned by God. Rasputin barely ever bathed, and was once heard bragging that he hadn't changed his underwear in 6 months. His table manners were crude, and he seemed to always have food flecked in his long, unkempt beard. He would lick serving spoons clean before passing them along to his table mates, and liked to tear both bread and fish apart with his fingers, only to then wipe his oily, dirty hands on the tablecloth. Some historians believe Rasputin hammed up these rustic manners for the Russian aristocracy, who liked to see him as an eccentric. In the summer of 1914, Rasputin was outside his village home in Pokrovsky when a peasant woman attacked him with a knife, seriously wounding him in the stomach. Although she claimed she was acting alone and upon the belief that Rasputin was a false prophet, it soon came out that she was a follower of none other than Ilyador, the monk who'd heard Rasputin's confession about kissing the Tsarina. Officers believed it was he who had instigated the attack. After emergency surgery, Rasputin recovered. That same year, World War I broke out in Europe, and Tsar Nicholas II, who had family in the British monarchy, was poised to follow his allies into the fray. Rasputin gave him a chilling warning. He reportedly begged Nicholas not to join the conflict, telling him it would be the end of the monarchy, of the Romanovs, and of Russian institutions. He would never find out how right he was. World War I was a complete disaster for the Romanov Empire. The country lost millions of men to the conflict, and the new German enemy only fanned the country's flames of hatred for Tsarina Alexandra, German princess that she was. Russia's morale and its economy tanked, with inflation rising 300%, leading the country to the brink of starvation. If that wasn't bad enough, food transportation lines also broke down, leaving many Russian peasants almost completely without the means or the ability to buy food. The seeds for revolution were sown. Not that Rasputin would be there to see it. In December of 1916, a group of aristocrats led by the Tsar's cousin, Felix Yusupov, hatched a plot to dispose of Rasputin once and for all. On the evening of December 29th, after receiving yet another death threat through the phone that morning, Rasputin went to Yusupov Palace to meet with Felix. Yusupov then led him down to the basement, where he'd laid out Madeira wine and cakes. The cakes had been laced with cyanide by one of Yusupov's 4 accomplices, who were all lying in wait upstairs. Yet Rasputin appeared to suffer no harm after eating them. He drank the wine, also poisoned, and still nothing. After excusing himself from the room, Yusupov went up to his conspirators, took a revolver, went back downstairs, pointed the weapon at Rasputin's chest, and pulled the trigger from point-blank range. Rasputin, somehow still alive, jumped up and went for Yusupov, who then fled. When the pair ran into the courtyard, another conspirator managed to shoot Rasputin again, and the holy man fell into a snowbank. In the early morning hours of December 30th, 1916, Yusupov and his allies wrapped Rasputin's body in a cloth and dropped it into a river, though even then some said that he was still alive right up until he hit the freezing waters. Before anyone could recover the body, word got out that Rasputin was finally gone, and rumours started to spread. Publications reported any scrap they could, and a feverish, highly unreliable atmosphere took hold. When investigators found Rasputin's body, a full 2 days after his assassination, they sent it to St. Petersburg's senior autopsy surgeon, who stated that he found 3 gunshot wounds in his exam, with one on Rasputin's forehead, as well as a host of probable post-mortem injuries. But there were also details he didn't find. He found no water in Rasputin's lungs, indicating he hadn't been alive when he hit the river. And he found no poison in Rasputin's system. For years, the story circulated of Rasputin eating Yusupov's poisoned cakes, adding to the mad monk's mystique and making him seem even more superhuman. Shockingly, it was Rasputin's daughter Maria who held the key to the mystery. She claimed that her father didn't care for sweet foods, and that he never would have eaten the cakes that Yusupov had offered him. She believed that Yusupov had to have embellished the story. Even after his demise, the Russian royal family didn't abandon Rasputin. When his funeral took place on January 2nd, 1917, at a small church, only the imperial family and their close friends were allowed to attend. They even barred Rasputin's wife and children. In hindsight, Rasputin's collapse was a harbinger for the collapse of the entire Romanov line. After years of turmoil, starvation, and unrest, the February Revolution spread throughout Russia in the very month following Rasputin's death, forcing Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate that March. By 1918, the Romanov family themselves were gone. Had they listened to Rasputin when it mattered, they might have saved themselves. But as it was, they joined their holy man in death. Thanks for watching History Exposé. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page, Factinate, for more incredible facts about everything.